As I've grown up, making day trips into Chicago and Denver with my family and friends, I've always felt a deep compassion for those experiencing homelessness. Seeing people pitch tents on the side of the busy roads and people on the corner with cardboard signs, I always felt the need to help. I just never quite knew how. A constant theme we see throughout the Bible is Jesus' command to uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed and speak for those who have no voice. I believe advocacy is perhaps one of the best ways to do this, and the way I personally am called to do this. Because we see a huge disconnect between the realities that homeless people face and the public's perception of these challenges. And it's caused a lot of harmful interaction, leading me to realize how important it is to inform those we meet and ourselves about the truth about these challenges. It's perhaps the first step towards lasting change. Unfortunately, the North American church has largely failed to properly interact with the poor in our community. We hear rhetoric such as "not in my backyard," and we see a huge increase in the white flight, or middle to upper class families, mainly white, fleeing from urban areas because of the suburbanization of poverty. We believe, whether it be conscious or not, that the poor and homeless are to be avoided or seen only on our own terms, such as when we're volunteering. This fear and lack of respect for the homeless is incredibly harmful to their dignity, and it reinforces a lot of harmful stereotypes. So, throughout this year, I sought to figure out how I and the church as a whole can more effectively uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, and speak for those who have no voice, such as the orphan and the widow. After all, even Jesus, our own Savior, was homeless during his most influential years in ministry. He was a vagabond, wandering throughout Israel and Galilee, relying on others for a place to lay his head at night and food. So, when even Jesus experienced this, how can we refuse to show kindness to those who experience it today? It is our responsibility, I believe, not only as the church, but as the community around them, to care for them, speak up for them, and show them true biblical compassion. So, throughout this year, I've identified 3 major keys to more effectively interacting with the poor around us. The first being that we have to realize poverty is not just material. It extends far beyond that. Second, the important balance of grace and truth. And finally, the vital role that God plays in our success. As I said, we are all poor. And now, of course, many of us probably have a couple more zeros on the end of our paycheck than your average homeless person. However, poverty extends far deeper than that. It extends to all 4 broken relationships we experienced after the fall. In a book I called When Helping Hurts, that's what the authors Brian Fickert and Stephen Corbett claim, that man's relationship with self, others, creation, and God were all broken after the fall, and poverty can exist in any one of these 4 areas, and they're all deeply interconnected. So that means our poverty alleviation efforts must also extend to all of these 4 relationships. Or, in the words of the author, poverty alleviation is the ministry of reconciliation, moving people closer to glorifying God by living in right relationship with God, with self, with others, and with the rest of creation. The North American church, I believe, has largely failed to recognize this view of poverty, and it's had a vast impact on the way we organize our outreach programs. We oftentimes view poverty as only material, and so our alleviation efforts only focus on the material. And although this may put a Band-Aid on a lot of people's hurts, it can cause long-lasting effects like spiritual poverty. Now, for example, many of us here probably view free things as a gift, something we love to receive. However, when people who are poorer than ourselves repeatedly receive free things from those who are richer or quote-unquote better than them, they can often feel inferior, and this inferiority has the ability to breed guilt, shame, and overall a lack of self-confidence. Furthermore, we can experience increased egos and excessive pride. Oftentimes, we may feel like we've just single-handedly saved someone or been a significant part in their recovery when this simply isn't the case. This superiority then leads to God complexes that we feel and that we carry with us when we interact with the poor. And so, when we operate under this assumption that poverty is only material, you combine the feelings of inferiority of the materially poor and the God complexes of the materially non-poor, and it results in extreme harm to both individuals involved. We see this manifest itself on both a large and small scale, from every time you hand a $5 bill to the person on the corner, all the way to the short-term mission trips many of us have likely been a part of. So, in light of this, what are we to do? Well, first of all, it requires some internal reflection on our part. I urge you to ask yourself, do you perhaps see a God complex within yourself in the ways you interact with the materially poor? Or are you perhaps only addressing one of these 4 relationships? Furthermore, we as the church and as a nation have to ask ourselves how we can give more comprehensive assistance to those experiencing poverty and homelessness. To do this well, we have to care about each of the 4 relationships. To focus on people's relationship with self, we have to start implementing programs that empower people to set goals and achieve those goals on their own. And to heal their relationship with others, we have to start connecting them with the community around them, inviting them into our spaces, and providing support systems. Because when people have support systems around them, they're infinitely more likely to succeed. We also have to work on fixing the broken systems we've created. Because when we do this well, we can, in a way, heal their relationship with creation and our own creations that we've made. And finally, we have to show them Jesus' love, of course, reuniting them with their Creator and instilling worth within them. Because when you're out on the streets, you can get easily broken down by people constantly telling you that if you don't have a job, if you don't have money, if you can't sustain yourself, then you're worthless. But when we reunite them with their Creator, we can instill within them the truth that their worth isn't from how much money they have, but from who they are and who they're made by. Secondly, I also had to learn the important balance of grace and truth. Because too much of either one of these things can have dire consequences. We have to hold a balance. For example, if we hold too much grace, we can often end up doing things for people and failing to engage them in their own recovery. And when we do this, they ultimately don't receive long-lasting recovery. On the other end of the spectrum, when we extend too much truth to someone, it can be equally as harmful. We hear things such as, just get a job, and people denying the difficulty that these people face. It also can result in increased pride within ourselves. So, we have to live in the tension of these 2 things, recognizing the fault of both the individual and the systems they've been subjected to. Because we, as broken people, will make poor choices. That's just part of life. However, we as broken people will also only be able to create broken systems. And when people don't have the proper support systems around them, these systems can easily take advantage of them. So, as the body of Christ, we need to be offering people support while also engaging them in their own recovery, urging them to own their mistakes, while also acknowledging the systems that they've been subjected to that are likely also a part of the reason they're in the situation that they are. Micah Harrison, the director of the Life Center, also brought to my attention the importance of healthy boundaries and expectations. A particularly moving story he told me was about a client he was helping one day. This is a particularly difficult client, and something occurred where the client ended up pushing Micah. And so he had to ban this client from the property for 2 weeks. The next day, the client came back, asking for more help. And although Micah wanted to help this person, of course, He had to turn them away, leaving them outside the doors. This client, incredibly upset and obviously needing help, started banging on the doors, begging to be let in, begging for help. But Micah had to walk away. He had an expectation for this client to treat him with respect, and when that wasn't fulfilled, he had to set the boundary of a 2-week ban. But this wasn't absent of grace. He still allowed the client grace by letting him back in, but only after the 2-week ban. And he still upheld the truth that our actions do have consequences, and that's something we need to deal with. And although this doesn't always feel like the loving thing to do, it shows them that we respect them, and we care enough not to treat them with pity, but as fellow human beings. So, when interacting with the poor, it's incredibly important to have expectations and boundaries, but within that, walk in grace and truth. And now, at this point, I had learned a lot about what it means to effectively interact with the poor and to advocate for others, but I wanted to practice this in some way. So, as I looked into what I, an 18-year-old high school student, could do to advocate for a certain community, I stumbled across an organization called Covenant House. Covenant House is an amazing organization that helps homeless youth across America and in several other countries as well. Now, the unique thing about Covenant House is they don't only provide programs and housing and assistance to homeless youth, but they also engage the community. They do this by encouraging and equipping people to attend and host what they call sleepouts. A sleepout is where a group of people or a community will get together and sleep outside for one night to raise awareness and raise money for either Covenant House or another organization. So I thought, what better way for me to raise awareness than host a sleepout for the Front Range community? But as I got into the weeds of it, I quickly realized this is no easy task. It's important to note I'm a highly independent person and somewhat of a perfectionist. And so when a problem occurred, I wanted to fix things on my own. And although this may work for me once or twice, it tends to pile up, and it was stressing me out. But eventually, in some chaotic whirlwind, I was able to pull it together, and it happened. People showed up that night. We had a quick informational meeting with some activities, and then we were able to go outside for some community time, sleep outside for the night, and do a quick debrief in the morning. And we ended up raising over $400. And although I did feel some relief that this was over, I didn't quite feel at peace about what had happened. I kept dwelling on what I could have done better, what mistakes I had made, and how I could have improved the experience for some people. And despite being a self-proclaimed perfectionist, it's not like me to dwell upon these things. I usually can put it behind me pretty quickly. But life goes on, and Sunday rolled around. And as I was sitting in church that morning, still anxiously thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have changed this or that to improve it, the pastor was talking about a passage in John 21. This is the passage of Jesus and the miraculous catch of fish, and it goes like this. One day, 7 disciples, including Peter, were out on a boat at sea fishing. This was after Jesus had risen, and it's during his 40 days on earth. And it's important to note that these disciples are professional fishermen. They do this as their job. It's their living. It's how they get their money. But despite that, they couldn't catch a single fish. Then Jesus appears to them on shore, but they don't recognize him at first. They're too far out. And so he calls out to them, telling them to switch their nets to the other side of the boat. And so they follow this strange man's advice, and they switch their nets. They end up catching so many fish that not even the 7 disciples could pull it into the boat together. And although this is miraculous, it's not quite what struck me. There's more to the story. As they bring in the boat, Peter sees that it's Jesus on the shore. He recognizes him, and he jumps out of the boat, filled with so much excitement, and he pulls the net of fish ashore by himself, something previously 7 disciples weren't capable of. And it just showed me that when we're exciting and willing to involve God in our processes, no matter if we're professionals or no matter our skill level, He gives us the strength to pull in nets bigger than we could imagine. And not only that, but pull them ashore and finish the job. And now, admittedly, sitting in church that Sunday morning, I also realized I had run out of strength. I was stressed and worried, and it felt like I had the weight of the world upon me. But I also realized, sitting in church, never once did I invite God into that process. Never once did I ask Him for guidance or peace or safety. And I was feeling the effects of that. Despite being an independent person, I realized this isn't something I can do on my own. And especially if I had to pursue a career in ministry and nonprofit management, I have to invite God into the process. It's a non-negotiable. Because when we do this, we can pull in nets bigger than we could ever imagine. And now I had learned a lot about what it means to effectively interact with the poor. First and foremost, realizing that we're all poor. And like I said, many of us are probably quite a bit more wealthy than a homeless person. However, poverty extends to all 4 relationships, not just material means. And so when we're interacting with the poor, we need to keep that in mind so that we can approach these situations humbly with grace and truth. We also need to invite God into this process. So today, I challenge you with a few more questions. I ask you to ask yourself, where are you poor? Where do you need to reconcile a relationship? But whatever you do today, I urge you to remember that we're all poor. We could all use a little bit of help, and we can all help each other out. So move forward today with humble hearts, walking in grace and truth to best serve those around you. Thank you.